The room was buzzing with the kind of energy that only a high-profile corporate event could generate. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, casting a golden glow on the sea of tailored suits and elegant gowns. Waiters glided through the crowd, offering champagne flutes on silver trays, while the low hum of polite conversation filled the air. It was the kind of event where deals were made, alliances forged, and reputations solidified. At the center of it all stood the CEO, a woman known as much for her sharp business acumen as for her icy demeanor. She was a force to be reckoned with, a self-made success story who had climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless determination. Tonight, she was the star of the show, surrounded by admirers and sycophants eager to bask in her presence. Then, he walked in. He was a tall, well-dressed man with a confident stride and an air of quiet authority. His dark suit fit him perfectly, and his polished shoes gleamed under the chandelier light. But it was his calm, composed expression that caught the attention of those nearby. He moved through the crowd with ease, nodding politely to those he passed, until he reached the CEO. The room seemed to hold its breath as he extended his hand. "Good evening," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It's a pleasure to meet you." The CEO glanced at his outstretched hand, then at his face. For a moment, she hesitated, her lips tightening into a thin line. Then, with a barely perceptible shake of her head, she turned away, leaving his hand hanging in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. The man didn't flinch. He simply lowered his hand and offered a small, enigmatic smile, as if he had expected nothing less. The CEO, meanwhile, pretended not to notice the awkwardness, turning her attention to someone else as though the encounter had never happened. But the room had noticed. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, eyes darting between the CEO and the man who had just been publicly snubbed. Who was he? Why had she refused to shake his hand? And why did he seem so unbothered by her rejection? The man didn't linger. With the same calm demeanor, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as quickly as he had appeared. But the tension he left behind lingered, casting a shadow over the otherwise glittering event. The CEO, for all her poise, couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was something about the man's smile, something knowing, almost amused, that made her uneasy. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it didn't matter. She was at the top of her game, untouchable. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought that she had just made a terrible mistake. Little did she know, the man she had so casually dismissed was about to change her life in ways she could never have imagined. The CEO's rise to the top was the stuff of legends, a story often told in boardrooms and business schools as an example of grit and determination. But like all legends, it had its darker chapters, ones she rarely spoke about and tried hard to forget. Years ago, she had started her career as a young, ambitious woman with big dreams and even bigger obstacles. Growing up in a small town, she had learned early on that the world wasn't kind to those who didn't fight for their place in it. Her family had struggled to make ends meet, and she had vowed to never let herself be held back by her circumstances. She worked tirelessly, often putting in 16-hour days, sacrificing friendships, relationships, and even her health to climb the corporate ladder. Her breakthrough came when she landed a job at a prestigious firm, where she quickly made a name for herself as a no-nonsense, results-driven leader. She was praised for her ability to make tough decisions, even when they were unpopular. But one decision, in particular, had haunted her for years. Early in her career, she had been tasked with overseeing a project that involved a small but impactful nonprofit organization. The nonprofit, which focused on providing education and resources to underserved communities, had been struggling to secure funding. They had reached out to her firm for support, hoping to form a partnership that could help them expand their reach. At the time, the CEO, then a mid-level manager, had been advised to cut ties with the nonprofit. Her superiors argued that the organization was too risky, too small, and not aligned with the firm's profit-driven goals. Despite her initial hesitation, she had followed orders, publicly criticizing the nonprofit and withdrawing all support. The decision had been a turning point in her career. It earned her a reputation as someone who could make the hard calls, and it paved the way for her eventual rise to the top. but it also came at a cost. The nonprofit, unable to recover from the blow, had been forced to shut down, leaving countless families without the support they desperately needed. The CEO had told herself it was just business, that she couldn't afford to let emotions cloud her judgment. But deep down, she knew she had betrayed a part of herself, the part that still remembered what it was like to struggle, to need help, to hope for a better future. Over the years, she had buried those feelings, convincing herself that success required sacrifice. She built walls around herself, becoming the cold, unapproachable leader everyone now knew. But no matter how high she climbed, she could never quite escape the guilt that lingered in the back of her mind. And now, as she stood in that glittering ballroom, surrounded by the trappings of her success, she couldn't shake the feeling that her past was about to catch up with her. The man who had been snubbed by the CEO had a story of his own, one that was as inspiring as it was humbling. Born and raised in a rough neighborhood, he had faced challenges that would have broken many others. His childhood was marked by poverty, violence, and a lack of opportunities, but even as a young boy, he had dreamed of something more. His parents, hardworking but struggling to make ends meet, had instilled in him the value of education and perseverance. "You have to be twice as good to get half as far," his father used to say, a phrase that would become his mantra. Determined to rise above his circumstances, he threw himself into his studies, often staying up late to read by the dim light of a flickering bulb. But life wasn't easy. When he was just 15, his father passed away unexpectedly, leaving the family in even greater financial turmoil. His mother, already working multiple jobs, could barely keep the household afloat. For a while, it seemed like his dreams of a better future might slip away. Then, something remarkable happened. A local nonprofit organization stepped in, offering him a scholarship and mentorship that would change the course of his life. The organization, run by a group of passionate volunteers, provided not just financial support but also guidance, encouragement, and a sense of belonging. For the first time, he felt like he had a real chance. He worked harder than ever, excelling in school and eventually earning a full scholarship to a prestigious university. There, he studied business and social work, driven by a desire to give back to the community that had supported him. After graduating, he returned to his hometown, determined to make a difference. But the nonprofit that had once been his lifeline was struggling. Funding had dried up, and the organization was on the verge of collapse. He knew he had to do something. Drawing on his education and experience, he began to rebuild the nonprofit from the ground up, pouring his heart and soul into the effort. It wasn't easy. There were countless setbacks, moments of doubt, and sleepless nights. But he refused to give up. Slowly but surely, the organization began to thrive. Under his leadership, it expanded its programs, reaching more families and communities than ever before. His work didn't go unnoticed. He became a respected figure in the world of social entrepreneurship, known for his innovative approach and unwavering commitment to his mission. But despite his success, he remained humble, always remembering where he came from and the people who had helped him along the way. That's why he had attended the corporate event that night. He was there to speak about his nonprofit's latest initiative, a groundbreaking program that aimed to provide education and resources to underserved communities on a national scale. It was a bold vision, one that required the support of influential leaders and organizations. When he had approached the CEO, he had hoped to make a connection, to find an ally in his mission. Her refusal to shake his hand had been a blow, but it wasn't the first time he had faced rejection. He had learned to take it in stride, to keep moving forward no matter what. What he didn't know was that his presence at the event was about to set off a chain of events that would change not just his life, but the CEO's as well. The event's host stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone to quiet the murmuring crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing through the grand ballroom, "it's my honor to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening. He's a visionary leader, a champion of change, and someone who has dedicated his life to creating opportunities for those who need them most. Please welcome the founder of the New Horizons initiative." The room erupted into applause as the man who had been snubbed by the CEO earlier walked onto the stage. He smiled warmly, his calm and confident demeanor instantly putting the audience at ease. The CEO, standing near the back of the room, froze. Her heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. This was the man whose hand she had refused to shake. As he began to speak, his voice carried a quiet power that captivated the room. He talked about his journey, from growing up in a struggling neighborhood to building a nonprofit that had transformed countless lives. He spoke of the challenges he had faced, the people who had believed in him, and the importance of giving others the same opportunities he had been given. "I stand here tonight not just as the founder of New Horizons," he said, "but as someone who knows what it's like to be overlooked, to be dismissed, to be told that your dreams are too big. But I also know what it's like to have someone believe in you, to give you a chance when no one else would. That's why I do what I do. Because every person, no matter where they come from, deserves a chance to succeed." The audience was spellbound, hanging on his every word. But for the CEO, his speech was like a mirror, reflecting back the choices she had made and the person she had become. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as he continued, his words cutting through her carefully constructed facade. "A few years ago," he said, his tone growing more somber, "our organization faced a crisis. We lost a major source of funding, and for a while, it seemed like we might not survive. It was a difficult time, but it taught me an important lesson, that success isn't just about what you achieve, but about how you treat others along the way. It's about recognizing the humanity in everyone, no matter their background or circumstances." The CEO's mind raced. She remembered the nonprofit she had criticized all those years ago, the one she had dismissed as too risky, too small. Could it be the same organization? She felt a wave of guilt wash over her as the pieces fell into place. The man's voice grew stronger as he reached the climax of his speech. "Tonight, I'm proud to announce the launch of our new national initiative, which will bring education, resources, and hope to communities across the country. But this isn't just my vision, it's a call to action for all of us. Because real change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when we come together, when we lift each other up, when we choose compassion over indifference." The room erupted into applause once again, but the CEO barely heard it. She was too consumed by her thoughts, by the weight of her past actions and the realization of what she had done. She had dismissed this man, this visionary leader, without a second thought. And now, as she listened to him speak, she couldn't help but feel that she had been on the wrong side of history. As the man stepped down from the stage, the crowd surged forward to congratulate him. The CEO hung back, unsure of what to do. She wanted to approach him, to apologize, but the thought of facing him filled her with dread. Finally, she took a deep breath and made her way through the crowd. When she reached him, he turned to her, his expression calm and unreadable. She began, her voice trembling. "I owe you an apology." He looked at her for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Then, he smiled, a genuine, forgiving smile. "We all make mistakes," he said softly. "What matters is what we do next." The CEO felt a lump form in her throat. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, to acknowledge the pain she had caused and the person she had become. It was a humbling moment, but also a hopeful one. As she walked away, she knew that this was just the beginning. The man's words had struck a chord deep within her, and she was determined to make things right. But how? And where would she start? The CEO stood at the edge of the room, her mind racing as she watched the man from the stage mingle with the crowd. His calm demeanor and genuine smile stood in stark contrast to the storm of emotion swirling inside her. She felt a mix of guilt, regret, and something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she could make amends for her past mistakes. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and began to make her way toward him. The crowd seemed to part as she approached, their curious eyes following her every move. When she finally reached him, he turned to face her, his expression calm but unreadable. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded and gestured toward a quieter corner of the room. They walked in silence, the weight of the unspoken hanging heavy between them. When they were finally alone, the CEO took another deep breath and began to speak. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Not just for what happened earlier tonight, but for everything. I didn't realize who you were, and even if I had, I'm not sure I would have acted differently. And that's what shames me the most. The man listened quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was no judgment in his gaze, only patience and understanding. I made a decision years ago, she continued, her voice growing stronger as the words poured out. A decision that hurt your organization and the people it served. At the time, I told myself it was just business, that I had to make the tough calls to succeed. But the truth is, I was selfish. I was so focused on climbing the ladder that I forgot what really matters, people. And for that, I am truly sorry. The man nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. Thank you for saying that, he said finally. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong, especially in a room full of people who look up to you. The CEO felt a lump form in her throat. She had expected anger, resentment, even indifference. But his kindness caught her off guard, and for a moment, she was at a loss for words. I've made mistakes too, he said gently. We all have. What matters is what we do next. How we choose to move forward. The CEO nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I want to make things right, she said. I don't know how, but I want to help. Your work, it's important. It's life-changing. And I want to be a part of it, if you'll let me. The man smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I believe in second chances, he said. And I believe in the power of redemption. If you're serious about helping, then I'd be honored to have you on board. The CEO felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced by a sense of determination. She knew this was just the beginning, that making amends would take more than just words. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was on the right path. As they talked, the man shared more about his nonprofit's latest initiative, a bold new program aimed at providing education and resources to underserved communities on a national scale. The CEO listened intently, her mind already racing with ideas on how she could contribute. We're launching a fundraising campaign next month, he said. And we're looking for partners who believe in our mission. People who are willing to use their influence and resources to create real, lasting change. I'll do whatever it takes, the CEO said without hesitation. I'll use my platform, my connections, everything I have to support your work. This is important, and I want to be a part of it. The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's not going to be easy, he said. There will be challenges, setbacks, and people who doubt us. But if we stay true to our mission, if we keep our focus on the people we're trying to help, I believe we can make a difference. The CEO felt a surge of determination. For the first time in years, she felt like she was part of something bigger than herself, something meaningful and important. As the event wound down, the CEO and the man continued to talk, their conversation shifting from business to personal. They shared stories about their lives, their struggles, and their dreams. And in that moment, the walls the CEO had built around herself began to crumble, replaced by a sense of connection and purpose. When they finally parted ways, the CEO felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to face it. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks that followed the corporate event were a whirlwind of activity for the CEO. True to her word, she threw herself into supporting the New Horizons initiative, using her influence and resources to amplify its mission. She reached out to her network of business leaders, philanthropists, and policymakers, urging them to join the cause. Her passion was undeniable, and it wasn't long before others began to take notice. The man from the event, now her partner in this new endeavor, was impressed by her dedication. He had seen firsthand the power of redemption, but even he was surprised by how quickly and wholeheartedly she had embraced the opportunity to make amends. Together, they worked tirelessly to launch the nonprofit's national initiative, a program that promised to bring education, resources, and hope to underserved communities across the country. The CEO's transformation didn't go unnoticed by those who knew her. Her colleagues, accustomed to her cold and calculating demeanor, were taken aback by her newfound warmth and humility. She was no longer the distant, unapproachable leader they had once feared. Instead, she was someone who listened, who cared, who was willing to roll up her sleeves and get involved. But the change wasn't just professional, it was personal, too. For the first time in years, the CEO felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond her career success. She began to reconnect with her roots, visiting the small town where she had grown up and rekindling relationships with old friends and family members she had long neglected. She even reached out to the people she had hurt along the way, offering apologies and making amends where she could. One evening, as she sat in her office reviewing plans for the upcoming fundraising gala, the man from the nonprofit walked in. He had become a regular presence in her life, and their partnership had blossomed into a genuine friendship. "How's it going?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. The CEO looked up and smiled. "Busy," she said. "But good. Really good." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've done amazing work these past few weeks. I know it hasn't been easy, but I want you to know how much it means, not just to me, but to the people we're trying to help." The CEO felt a lump form in her throat. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I should be thanking you. You've given me a second chance, and I don't take that lightly." The man smiled. "We all deserve a second chance," he said. "It's what we do with it that matters." The fundraising gala was a resounding success. Held in a grand ballroom filled with influential leaders and philanthropists, the event raised millions of dollars for the New Horizons initiative. The CEO and the man stood side by side on stage, their partnership a symbol of what could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. As the CEO addressed the crowd, her voice was filled with emotion. "This isn't just about money," she said. "It's about hope. It's about giving people the tools they need to build a better future for themselves and their families. And it's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and equitable world." The audience erupted into applause, but the CEO's eyes were fixed on the man standing beside her. In him, she had found not just a partner, but a mentor and a friend. He had shown her that success wasn't just about what you achieved, but about how you treated others along the way. In the months that followed, the CEO continued to work closely with the New Horizons initiative, but her involvement went beyond just writing checks and attending events. She visited the communities the nonprofit served, listening to the stories of the people whose lives had been transformed by its programs. She met children who had been given the chance to go to school, parents who had found stable jobs, and families who had been lifted out of poverty. Each visit was a reminder of why she had chosen this path, and each story fueled her determination to do more. She began to use her platform to advocate for systemic change, pushing for policies that would address the root causes of inequality and create opportunities for all. But perhaps the most profound change was the one that happened within her. The CEO had always been driven by a desire to succeed, but now her definition of success had shifted. It was no longer about climbing the corporate ladder or amassing wealth and power. It was about making a difference, about leaving the world a little better than she had found it. One evening, as she sat on the porch of her childhood home, watching the sun set over the horizon, the CEO reflected on her journey. She thought about the choices she had made, the mistakes she had learned from, and the second chance she had been given. She had come a long way, but she knew her work was far from over. There were still challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, and lives to touch. But for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of peace. She had found her purpose, and she was ready to embrace it. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the CEO smiled. She had started this journey as a cold, distant leader, but she was ending it as something far greater, a person who had learned the true meaning of success, and who was determined to use her gifts to make the world a better place. And in that moment, she knew that her story was just beginning.